Thank you both for joining us. Today we're going to be, the resolution for today is who was the greatest heavyweight of all time, Joe Louis or Muhammad Ali? And arguing for Louis is Bernard Fernandez. Bernard's a longtime writer for the Philadelphia Daily News. He also wrote for Ring Magazine. He was the 5-time president of the Boxing Writers Association of America. He was inducted into the Pennsylvania and New Jersey Boxing Halls of Fame. He received the Nat Fleischer Award for boxing journalism, and he was inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame in 2020. His third anthology of boxing writing, Championship Rounds, Round 3, is available now with a foreword written by George Foreman. Arguing for Ali, the Ali side will be Tom Gray. He's written for a number of outlets, serving 10 years at the Ring Magazine with 2 years as the managing editor. He remains on the Ring ratings panel, and he's currently deputy editor of the Sporting News, and he just published an interview with Tyson Fury ahead of his third fight with Derek Chisora this weekend. Here's the format for today's debate, just a turn-based debate. We will have, each side will have 5 minutes to make an opening case. We will have 5 minutes for Louis. We'll have 5 minutes for Ali. Then we go into 2 rounds of rebuttal. So there'll be 2 minutes of rebuttal for Bernard Fernandez, and then 2 minutes of rebuttal for Tom Gray, 2 minutes of rebuttal for Bernard Fernandez, 2 minutes of rebuttal for Tom, and then we move to the closing. We have 3 minutes of closing for Louis and 3 minutes of closing for Ali. And after that, we'll open it up to questions from the class, both about boxing, about Louis, about Ali, and also potentially about sports journalism. Let me get my timer ready, and we'll go ahead and start with Bernard Fernandez, who is arguing for Louis, and you can begin whenever you're ready.
Well, I'm glad my opponent for this is Tom Gray, because Tom was with Ring Magazine for 10 years, last 2 years as managing editor, and that was the Bible of boxing for 100 years. So if something appeared on the pages of the Ring, it must be pretty accurate. And in this past year, the 100 and last year of the print edition, they had 2 special issues. One included the 100 best punchers of the past 100 years. The other was for the 100 best fighters of the past 20 years or 100 years. And the top puncher of all time, according to the Ring Magazine in their special edition, was Joe Louis. Here's what they put about Joe. The main reason for his popularity was his awesome punching power and his chilling proficiency in scoring knockouts. When Louis put his hands on his opponents, they almost always collapsed in broken heaps, and this formidable ability would command the public's fascination longer than any other heavyweight champion. That would be for 25 defenses over 11 years and 8 months. Okay, I looked to see where Muhammad Ali finished among the top 100 punchers. And the answer to that was he didn't. He was a great fighter. He had a lot of great qualities, but that type of punching power that Joe Louis possessed was not one of them. Then we go to the top 100 fighters of all time, according to Ring Magazine. Number 1 was Sugar Ray Robinson. I don't dispute that. Number 2 was Joe Louis. Number 3 was Muhammad Ali. Okay, difference between 2 and 3, you can make an argument there. But I don't think there's getting around the fact that one of the 2 people being discussed here today is number 1 of the greatest punchers of all time, and Muhammad Ali is not in the top 100. It's pretty difficult to get around that. There are a lot of other similarities and certain differences. Ali was flashy. He was loud, but his style was different. He did a lot of things that they don't teach boxers to do. He held his hands low. He leaned back from punches instead of moving to the side, and creating angles. There's an old saying in boxing: he did everything wrong, but it turns out right. Roy Jones was a lot like that. And that works to the point where it stops working. Joe Louis, on the other hand, was technically flawless. He well, if I can find, or basically, he did not hurry himself, did not try to do anything that technically was not what he was taught. And when he heard him, man, he knew how to finish, probably as well as anybody, including, the Mike Tysons and the George Foremans and the Sonny Listons. And Harry Mullen, the acclaimed British sports journalist, in his 1987 book, The Great Book of Boxing, talked about how Lewis was a sociological phenomenon. He was off for 3 years, as Muhammad Ali was, but for World War II. And he basically helped change things for the better sociologically, as Muhammad Ali did, in a different sort of manner. But the one thing here is that a lot of you probably have seen documentaries on Muhammad Ali, videos of Muhammad Ali. He's everywhere. I mean, he was a superstar at a time when media was available in all different kinds of formats. Joe Louis, most of his fights were not on television. I mean, he started, his career in the late 1930s and fought to 1951, when very few people even had television sets. He's probably a rumor to a lot of the students that you have, because he was before their time. Muhammad Ali before their time also, but everybody knows who he is. And I think, here's one thing. I was at the in September 2012, Muhammad Ali was in Philadelphia at the National Constitution Center to accept the Liberty Medal in conjunction with the 225th anniversary of the ratification of the United States Constitution. I was there. Joe Louis Barrow II, the son of Joe Louis, turned to Muhammad Ali, who was seated by the podium, and he said, "Like my father, when you entered the sport of boxing, the world was in turmoil, much as it is today. The two of you made opposite choices. My father choosing to volunteer in World War II, and you, for your religious convictions, refusing to serve in Vietnam. In different ways, you both defended the idea of the Constitution, ideals of the Constitution. But time has shown we were both on the right side of history." I think that says that Joe Louis made a positive impact in ways outside of the ring, as Muhammad Ali did. And I don't think he has ever gotten enough credit for that. Just the two fights of the century that people always talk about. One, of course, was the first Muhammad Ali fight with Joe Frazier, but the one that preceded that was the 1938 rematch between Max Schmeling and Joe Louis. When Joe Louis knocked out Max Schmeling, the fight was being broadcast back to Germany. And after Max Schmeling was knocked down again, was first and then again, Adolf Hitler turned off the broadcast. And President Roosevelt, basically felt Joe's muscles. He said, "These are the muscles that are going to win World War II for us." So I think
okay. That's time. That's a great opening. And now we can turn to Tom Gray arguing for Ali.
Thank you very much. I was going to be slightly more technical about my approach than Bernard was there, but I'll start with explaining, if you're going to talk about the greatest heavyweight of all time or the greatest heavyweight champion of all time, you look at two things, and that's resume and eye test. So resume, first of all, Muhammad Ali has got victories over Sonny Liston, Floyd Patterson, Joe Frazier, Ken Norton, George Foreman, Ron Lyle, Ernie Shavers, Jerry Quarry, basically a who's who of the best generation of heavyweights of all time, and that's before or up to the present day. I don't think that anyone can match Ali's resume as a heavyweight, and ultimately when you're talking about how great a fighter is, then the victories should be the most important thing. And not just victories, but the manner of victories. First fighter to knock out George Foreman, first fighter to stop Ron Lyle, first fighter to stop Oscar Bonavena. And while Bernard made a great argument for Joe Louis's power in the fact that Ali was perhaps lacking in that area, you don't so much need power when you've got absolutely everything else. In terms of the eye test, Ali's the fastest heavyweight champion of all time. Floyd Patterson maybe gets a mention in that regard, but without question, Ali's in the top 2, or certainly in the top 2. In terms of hand-eye coordination, speed, reflexes, he was a heavyweight who at his peak was 214 pounds, and he moved like a welterweight, and that had never been done. And I understand that pure boxing, purists will turn around and say, technically Ali made mistakes. Well, if you're in the ring in a combat situation and you've got attributes that work to your advantage, like the speed, like the hand-eye coordination, like those amazing reflexes, being able to pull away from punches. Bernard mentioned angles, which is in fact incorrect. Ali was terrific at using angles in the ring. It was one of the things that he was best at. Lateral movement, his speed side to side, he could draw opponents. So, I mean, for probably the first 7 years of Ali's career, you could count the amount of rounds he lost on one hand. And that's because ultimately in the ring, he was almost untouchable at that point. In his second career, when he came back in 1970, after 3 years out, we learned that he could take a punch as well as any heavyweight champion before or since. And the amazing thing about Ali was his key signature victories actually came around when he was past his peak. Joe Frazier in 1975 in Manila is arguably the greatest heavyweight championship fight of all time. George Foreman, the most famous fight of all time, wins over Ken Norton. All these fights happened when Ali was actually past his peak. Joe Louis had a record 25 championship defenses, which will never be broken, in my opinion. It was an amazing run. Ali had 19 title defenses. But between the two, there is literally no contest between the men that Muhammad Ali defeated as heavyweight champion and the men that Joe Louis defeated. There's some good fighters in there for Joe Louis, probably Jersey Joe Walcott is his best title defense, at least one of them, because in my opinion, he lost the first one. But ultimately, I don't just think it's a case of Muhammad Ali being the greatest heavyweight champion of all time. He was the greatest sportsman of the 20th century and is unmatched across, not just all the heavyweights that we can mention, Joe Louis or Rocky Marciano or Jack Johnson or Evander Holyfield or Lennox Lewis or Tyson Fury, who fights at the weekend. He was very, very special. He was a social political figure, as was Joe Louis, but he's a massive inspiration to the world at large. And I was lucky enough to meet him in 1994, and it was one of the best days of my life. There's a boxing journalist who Bernard will be aware of called Harry Carpenter, who's from the UK. And Harry Carpenter said you could take Muhammad Ali onto an aeroplane, put a parachute on him and drop him in any country in the world, and the first person to come across him would see him and instantly smile. And I think that speaks volumes. He set the world on fire in the ring, but he was a guiding light. And that's me.
And that's bang on 10 minutes. All right, so now we can go to a rebuttal. So once again, this is just 2 minutes. So just you've got 2 rebuttals, but this is a chance to either extend an argument you've already made or respond and refute an argument that the opponent made.
Well, a lot of what Tom said is correct. Muhammad Ali was the prettiest, and I'm not just talking about his facial features, whatever. His style was very pleasing to look. It was like watching Baryshnikov doing Swan Lake, and there's no getting around that. But to say that, yes, 2 fights with Liston, 3 with Joe Frazier, 3 with Ken Norton, you can go down the list. he had fought great fighters, but Joe Louis, of his 25 defenses, held the title for 11 years and 8 months. He fought 37 fighters who were ranked by Ring Magazine, and 7 of whom were ranked #1. They talk about his bum of the month club because he was beating people so easily. Well, the reason they were considered bums was because they weren't as good as he was. But that doesn't mean that they were bad. I would put it this way: when saying that Muhammad Ali's style was prettier and more beautiful to watch. Elizabeth Taylor might have been the most beautiful woman ever to be on a movie screen, but that doesn't mean she was a better actress than Meryl Streep or Ingrid Bergman or whatever. Being beautiful at what you do does not necessarily make you the best at what you do. Certainly, I would say that he's #2 on my list of all-time greatest heavyweights, but Joe Louis is Joe Louis. And, about the thing about if he was dropped in any country of the world, as Angelo Dundee told me, and it was absolutely correct, that we boxing writers, if Ali was fighting on the dark side of the moon, would be hiring rocket ships to take us to the dark side of the moon to see him fight. They didn't have rocket ships when to the moon when Joe Louis fought, but when he did fight, if they had him, people would have been going there too. Yep.
Fabulous stuff, Bernard. As much as Joe Louis had the 25 title defenses, I need to go over the fact that there is talk of Louis, or it was Louis himself who said that he fought a bum a month. And some of the competition in there, to be honest, there's a fighter named Jack Roper who Joe Louis fought. I can't remember the year. I wasn't around then. But Joe Louis fought Jack Roper, who had done nothing at world level, had 64 wins and 40 losses. If Muhammad Ali had fought Jack Roper during his title reign, he would have been booed out of Madison Square Garden. The competition level, to be quite honest, between the two, regardless what way you want to swing it, I don't think there's a fighter that Joe Louis beat that would beat Muhammad Ali. Whereas I would name fighters that Muhammad Ali beat that I would pick to win over Joe Louis. Joe Louis essentially was 20 pounds lighter than Ali. Well, maybe about 10 pounds lighter when Ali was at his pomp. Ali's just a much bigger man. He is faster, quicker on his feet, and has too much of everything for Joe Louis, with the exception of power. But like Ali said, power doesn't mean nothing if you can't find anything to hit. That'll do.
Well, I can't argue with any of what he said, because the best of the fighters in Ali's resume that he beat, were great fighters. It was a golden age of heavyweight boxing. But he had 3 fights with Ken Norton. There are some people that would say that Ken Norton won all 3. He won the first one, obviously. That was the fight where he broke Ali's jaw. But the other 2 were questionable. He had a kind of questionable decision early in his career with Doug Jones. He had problems with a couple other fighters. I mean, they weren't all dominant performances. But the thing once again, you get down to the power quotient. It's very important, in boxing. And this from Ring Magazine, they had him as the #1 puncher of all time. Louis was a stalking, methodical assassin, patient and careful, but deadly accurate with compact shots. He didn't waste motion on punches. He knew how to get maximum leverage with every punch, and he knew when to pull the trigger, and he knew the right spots on the body to target. Basically, he was spectacular by not looking spectacular. And that's not the easiest thing in the world. I think, believe it or not, for his place in heavyweight history, I think if it's possible to be underrated with what he accomplished, I think he's that guy. If he had come along, at a time when there was satellite communications and cable television and all that, I think he would have been bigger than he is. A lot of the people who are in this class probably were not that familiar with him, but just because something happened in the 1930s or 40s or early 1950s didn't mean it didn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I mean, I'm obviously a bit younger than Bernard, but Joe Louis is like a god to me in the ring. I could watch Joe Louis. I've got full DVD collections of his fights. I think he is an absolutely terrific fighter, and certainly if you guys have not seen a lot of him, even if you were to put on a documentary and see some of his fights, then you would be you'd be amazed at just how great he is. Only because we're against Ali here am I so potent with the argument. Head to head, which is a concept that's not been brought up yet. Head to head, I just don't think there would be. I don't think that Louis would present problems for Muhammad Ali, because if you look back at a couple of fights and you'll get highlights of these, Louis fought Billy Conn, who was a light heavyweight champion coming up, very, very, very small. And Billy Conn ran circles around Joe Louis for, Bernard can correct me here, I think it was 11 rounds the fight went, Joe Louis stopped him. But before that, a light heavyweight was outboxing Joe Louis with speed and movement. And nobody did that better than Muhammad Ali, and Muhammad Ali is no light heavyweight. And Jersey Joe Walcott created similar problems, speed and movement, offering angles, and Joe Louis really, really struggled to get onto the target. Basically, Louis was very good at positioning himself to punch. He was awesome at it, actually, probably as good as any heavyweight, but his feet were a lot slower. And in a boxing ring, a lot of people get caught up in what's going on with the hands, but there's a lot to be said about what's going on with the feet. And I don't think that Joe Louis could catch up to Muhammad Ali. I don't think Joe Louis can knock out Muhammad Ali, even if he hits him his hardest, because Ali took punches off of guys that were absolute powerhouses. So head to head, I don't think old Joe Louis can get him, and I don't think old Joe Louis has got a better resume either. So that's ultimately where I started, and that's how I finish.
All right, so we got time for just one last sort of closing statement. Right, if this is a court case, this is your final appeal to the jury. So we'll go ahead and start with Bernard.
Well, in addition to what he did in the ring, and that was pretty spectacular stuff, Muhammad Ali was known for changing society, changing how the way people looked at the Vietnam War, the civil rights movement, and his impact with that. All well and good. I mean, and that's part of his legacy. There's no getting around that. What a lot of people don't realize is that in his manner, and his son remarked on this at the U.S. Constitutional Center in 2012, Joe Louis actually did the same thing, coming from a different approach at a different time. This from Harry Mullen again. Louis forced America to assess him on his talents rather than his pigmentation. It was a major breakthrough for America itself, as much as for boxing, and blacks throughout the continent benefited from Louis's success. As Chris Meade, a Louis biographer, put it, not only did Louis have to establish himself as a dominant athlete to get a shot at the heavyweight title, he also had to prove that blacks could compete on equal terms, with dignity, and without exacerbating racial antagonism. Louis accepted that responsibility and performed so well that he became a challenger to segregation, the challenge that began to crack the system. Now, here's one thing too about the America that Joe Louis grew up in. At the height of his popularity and fame, everybody liked Joe Louis. There was no case of blacks loved him, but the white fans didn't. Everybody loved Joe Louis, and they came to feel that way about Muhammad Ali too, but not all the time, But I think that Joe Louis gets short shrift sometimes when it comes in terms of what he did to change society when society needed to be changed.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And so, Tom, you get the last word. Closing statement for Ali.
Yeah, Bernard makes a good point there in terms of Joe Louis being idolized and adored by white America and black America. I think I'm not really touched on it, but Ali became a pariah essentially when he converted to Islam in the mid-60s. You know, and we're talking about a time where racism was absolutely poisonous in the 60s, and where Ali had came from at that particular time. I think there's a lot to be said about how Ali essentially changed that over the course of time. You know, he was against the Vietnam War, stood by his religious convictions, and eventually won his case in the Supreme Court. And a lot of people who had turned against him during his first title reign were on his side. He had the remarkable ability to communicate with people directly and through media that Joe Louis was lacking during his time. But Ali could, you know, Ali could walk the streets of New York City and give homeless people $100. There was a story once about he gave a $100 bill to a homeless person, and the guy was terrified because he wouldn't be able to get it cash. He wouldn't be able to actually spend the money at the time. No one would take it off him. So Ali said, I'll give you 520s. And he did. Gave him 520s and did take the $100 back. And he could communicate with people like that. And then equally, he met Brezhnev, you know, the Russian leader, in the late 70s, when the president of the United States couldn't get an appointment at that particular time. A lot's changed since then. But, you know, in closing, Ali fought Larry Holmes in his final championship fight. It was a massive underdog. Or, in fact, no, I think the odds were relatively even because it was Ali, but everyone knew Ali was going to lose the fight, or anyone that knew boxing. And someone, Jerry Eisenberg, who's a terrific journalist, asked someone after the fight, when Ali had lost badly, did you bet on the fight? And the black gentleman, they said yes. And he said, can I ask you who you bet on? And they said, I bet on Muhammad Ali. And he asked, why? And he said, because Ali gave me my identity. That'll do me.